I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these. Happy Super Bowl Sunday. It's almost a holiday, right? So was Mary Magdalene a whore, or was she Jesus's wife? So I wanted to answer that question. I set out to answer that question. But before we get into it, let's say hello to some people. Adric is first. He says it's on. Nina is here. She says, hi, everyone, with the peace sign, my favorite auntie. And Leon is going to be back on the replay. So he'll be #1 replay gang. Hi, Cynical Optimist. Peace to you as well. And thank you for being here. So wanted to let you guys know, I'm going to give you a list of all the things that I studied to answer these questions. So you don't think that this is just my opinion or what I think. I'm going to give you guys the actual bibliography right off the top. So I didn't write it out, but if you need it, here it is. So I looked at the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which is very Gnostic. King is the author, The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Jesus and the First Woman Apostle. Tuckett, The Gospel of Mary. DeBoer, B-O-E-R, The Gospel of Mary, Listening to the Beloved Disciple. And also Brock, Mary Magdalene, the First Apostle. So those are what I looked at. Okay, so let's get into it. So the Gospel of Mary was first discovered in 1896 in Cairo. Okay, so it was a Coptic version. It was in a papyrus codex. Okay, it was known the Berlin Codex or the Codex Berlinensis 8502. So if you want to look that up, you can as well. It was written in Sahidic Coptic. Parts of it were missing when it was first found. And then later in Greece, they found more fragments of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And so this also showed that this was a story that was widespread. This was as well known as any of the other Gospels. In fact, it was written earlier than some of the other Gospels that are in the Christian Bible today. So those were found on the Oxyrhynchus papyri. And then based on some other archaeological sites in Egypt, they found more fragments of the same gospel according to Mary Magdalene. Okay, so while it was as the Catholic Church was forming and deciding what books to put into the Bible, what to teach, it was decided not to include this gospel from Mary Magdalene's perspective, as well as several other gospels that were chosen to not be included. Hi, Adrian. Yeah, the love tribe. It's the best tribe on YouTube. We do love each other. So the first thing that I want to talk about, because for some people who follow Christianity, they see Mary Magdalene as this reformed whore. So we're going to talk about where that comes from. Other people say that Mary Magdalene was the wife of Jesus of Nazareth and that they actually had 2 children. And there's all kind of stories in between. I don't remember what their children's names were. I think it's Joseph and Sophia, I think, based on what these people say. So, but in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and these other Gnostic teachings that talk about Mary Magdalene with all of the disciples. Um, it is all every time Mary is included in these other gospels and these other writings and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, she is always portrayed as Jesus's closest disciple, not Peter, but she is portrayed as they have this relationship to the point where there's jealousy. And we'll talk about that maybe in a little bit, but Jesus kisses her on the mouth. And apparently, during that time, your bestest friends, you kiss them on the mouth, the people that you love the most. That's probably where we get those little side mouth kisses in kind of European culture. Um, but there was some jealousy about how often Jesus kissed Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And that is in a few different writings, not just one. Okay. Hi, Rocky. Thank you for being here. I discarded the fold. Oh, he's got some numerology going. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, Adrian. So you're saucy. So, in these writings and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, she seems to surpass the other apostles in understanding the underlying subtext of his meanings. So, like, when he's displaying these parables and he's telling these stories, it seems like she gets it a little faster and understands it and kind of takes it to this next level. She's a little woo woo and how she's talking, and Jesus like, that's exactly right, and everybody else is sort of like, what? So in all of these texts, in this gospel according to Mary Magdalene, she gets some secret knowledge or some like revelations from Jesus in private conversation. Okay. Particularly, they had a very interesting conversation after his resurrection. And so, you know how, like in the Bible, in the Gospels that we do see, Jesus is after his resurrection, he goes and sees the apostles and putting fingers in his side to make sure it's him and those kind of things. In the Gospel according to Mary Magdalene, she actually relays the conversation that was had when he came to see the apostles after his resurrection. So she had a unique relationship with him, and there's a reason why she relayed the conversation, and the gospels that we see don't, because some jealousy popped up. So the modern interpretations of it kind of have explored a even more deeper emotional connection, and that's where we get some people who believe that they were actually married and may have actually had children. Discarded the fold says, we are called for all time schooling to help with primordial issues, and name fame issues are still primordial in nature. I dig it. Keep in mind, if number 6 is actually a scroll, then the other letters and numbers, 1 through 5. Yeah, for sure. I dig it. I dig it. So, what was Mary Magdalene's relationship like with the other apostles, right? Because I was talking about that. Apparently, she's very special to Jesus, right? How is she getting along with others? Well, spoiler alert, some didn't like her, some did. So, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene shows the tension between her and Peter and her and Andrew. Peter, as we know in the Gospels, we're allowed to see, he had a bad temper, right? And so he had a jealous streak too, and would always get very jealous of how close Jesus and Mary Magdalene were, right? Andrew is kind of presented as Peter's sidekick. He's the guy back there going, yeah. So Peter often brings up a lot that women have no authority in the church. Women have no authority as scholars. Women have no authority to teach, right? Because that's how the Israelites, or the Pharisees and Sadducees, in case people didn't know that they were Israelites, they were Jewish, right? It was all Jewish law. At what was the norm then was that women had no authority, women couldn't teach, women weren't even allowed to read things, and so Peter's bringing this up a lot, reminding Jesus, women have no authority, Mary has no authority, right? And so he even questions the authenticity of what's been revealed to her, or the way that she's understanding things, because she's just a chick, right? So even accused her at one point of making shit up, like inventing things as we go. So then Levi comes and defends Mary and gets onto, there's an argument. He gets onto Peter, chastises him for jealousy, affirms Mary's insights as legitimate. He's privy to some other conversations. So this really reflects a lot of what was going on in the early Christian church, because as what eventually became the Roman Catholic Church was fighting it out with Kemet. So Kemet was also a place of where they're trying to establish Christianity upon Jesus's death. And so is Rome, which is interesting. Rome killed him, and Rome kind of won that battle on, they get to define who Jesus is. It's sort of odd to me, but to the victor go the spoils, right? His story. So, but a lot of what was going on in the early Christian church was about women's authority, because we had this very standardized dogmatic religion that said women have no authority. Then you have Jesus saying, hey, everybody's cool. You don't get to hate on anybody. Everybody can go to heaven. Everybody can get the teachings. Everybody, right? He said, I'm fulfilling the Mosaic law, right? So there was a lot of argument about a women's place where religion is concerned. So while these disputes were going on, Mary Magdalene, being super close to Jesus, kind of embodied this alternative, more inclusive spiritual leadership that contrasts very heavily with the hierarchical dogma that was already in place. And a lot of that hierarchical dogma was incorporated into this emerging Christian orthodoxy, the rules of the church as they were establishing them upon Jesus's death. So then we fast forward to the year 591. And now you're going to find out why you might think that Mary Magdalene is a reformed whore. So in 591, the year 591 CE, right, Pope Gregory I delivered a sermon, and he confused Mary Magdalene with the unnamed sinful woman in Luke. So that's chapter 7, verses 36 to 50. He says he confused Mary Magdalene with this other reformed whore, okay? And labeled Mary Magdalene as the repentant prostitute. So he characterized her in this way, and it caught fire, and then everybody's preaching it the same way. A lot of it was because he's the Pope, right? He's the head of that hierarchical structure. So if he says Mary Magdalene was a repentant prostitute, then that's how it is, period, right? So that persisted for centuries. This is why there's a lot of people who still think it today, even though there was never any evidence, never anything biblically, never in any of the scrolls, nothing that ever said that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, a whore, anything at all like that. Nothing. She was an intelligent woman who left all her stuff behind and went to follow Jesus, right? So, but she gets labeled this way. It persists for centuries. So when I say centuries, I mean in 1969. So this labeling happened in 591. This is how she's portrayed all the way up into 1969 during the reforms of Vatican II, right? Where they're going, when they do the reformations like this, they go back through all of the biblical texts and then all of what they call the catechism, which is a book where they put other guidance and laws as they determine them to be that are not in the Bible. Okay. So when they go through these reforms, they go back through everything, they clarify anything, they add stuff, that's what they do. So during this reform in 1969, that's when the Catholic Church officially corrected the mistake. Oh, it was a mistake, my bad. Oops. It was just an oopsie. Although they used the fact that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute or a whore as one of the backing and reasons for women not being able to be in the hierarchical structure. So they acknowledged their mistake, right? And acknowledged her as a prominent disciple. So this is in 1969. Now, is this information getting disseminated to all the Christian followers and all the? No, because by 1969, we have multiple denominations of Christianity. Not everybody is following the Catholic Church. And that information was just sort of a side note, oopsie. And yeah, she was a prominent disciple. Actually, she was one of the lead disciples. And they sort of whispered it and nobody caught on, right? They also said she witnessed the resurrection. Okay, based and the Catholic Church the Catholic Church in their archives, this is not the library, but the archives used to be called the secret archives. Now they're called, I think, the sacred archives. It's actually underground and it's 52 miles long. And they called it secret archives because nobody is allowed to see that stuff except them. And it's the higher ups, right? So they go through all their stuff and they say, oh yeah, Mary Magdalene was a prominent disciple and she witnessed the resurrection, but they sort of whisper it out of the side and nobody catches on. So that mischaracterization really is still prominent, right? And it completely overshadowed her role as a spiritual leader, right? Because they never included the Gospels and they allowed all this to keep going on. But if she is a prominent disciple and she witnessed the resurrection, it would seem that her gospel probably has some good information in it, right? So let's kind of summarize what her gospel says. We're not going to go through it word for word, but there are some pretty key elements throughout the gospel. And you guys, feel free to get your own copy and read it. It's very, very interesting, but it reads like the guidebook to the TVA. So kind of like the book of knowledge that we're going through on Wednesdays. It reads like the guidebook of the TVA. So take some time with it, okay? But some elements that go throughout the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is, one is about Jesus's teachings. A lot of it is like her explaining some of the stuff, some of the parables, some of the things that he was saying, her explaining it in her words and the way that she understood it, and Jesus correcting her if she's kind of going down the wrong way or didn't get it, or Jesus saying, yeah, that's exactly right. So a lot of this is Jesus said this is my understanding of it. And when I present my understanding of it to Jesus, this was his feedback for me in that moment. And a lot of what she focuses on is the soul's liberation from material attachments. And so, like I've talked about before, I've made mention before that in our modern day Bible, they changed the word liberation to salvation, meaning you can only be liberated if you're saved by God. But all of those original teachings said liberation, meaning you liberate yourself, right? So a lot of what she focused on is liberating yourself from material attachment, which would kind of go against capitalism. You know what I'm saying? And how and why it's important to find inner peace. So this was a lot of her focus. So she did talk about the conflicts that would happen with her and the apostles. And she gave both sides. He said this, and then he said this, and I said that, and then he did this. And so she's giving an account of what's going on, especially with Peter and Andrew, because they were the most, well, Peter was the most vocal about Mary Magdalene. So Peter and Andrew express a lot of skepticism about a vision that Mary Magdalene had. Levi defends her, and Levi urges the other apostles to follow her insights. Well, the interesting thing is, when Jesus tells the apostles after he sees them after the resurrection, the only part of the conversation that we already knew was that he said, go and spread the word, right? Go and tell people this story, tell them about me, go and tell people. Well, Peter and Andrew and some of them went off together, and Mary and Levi went off. And again, this is a day and age nobody listens to women. And so you can kind of see how it was easy enough to kill that message from Mary Magdalene and Levi and bury those books and those teachings and just go with the way that Peter and Andrew wanted to tell it, especially when Paul came along and kind of reinforced a lot of what Peter and Andrew said. Hi, I'm Lavo. Thank you for being here. Oh, appreciate you so much. And I appreciate you using the super chats. I'm still so happy to have those. It just tickles me. And I'm glad to be back. So the other thing she talks about is this theme of an inner knowing, like your insight, your personal connection to God, to soul, to source, to again, why she talks a lot about liberation. So that's kind of a central theme of hers. The gospel emphasizes inner spiritual knowledge. Like, what's right for you. You know how to treat other people. You know what the right way is. And kind of this path to liberation or this path to salvation. And that was a huge contrast with the dogmatic Christianity that we ended up with, right? So in Mary's vision, okay, so because this is kind of important, she gives details about this vision, okay? Mary tells about the vision, right, where she ascends through these different spiritual realms, these different layers. And in each realm, she confronts sort of a hostile power. So like these hostile powers represent different ideals of things that actually hurt other people. Like the first one might have been ignorance. She fights the monster of ignorance, and the next one is the monster of materialism, right? And every time she wins in this confrontation, she gets to go to the next level, right? And so that's her vision. She says her soul ascends through multiple spiritual realms and represent obstacles that the soul has to overcome to achieve liberation from the material world. Along the journey, she encounters these hostile gatekeepers who challenge her, and then the gatekeepers correspond to those specific things: passions, fears, attachments, whatever binds you to the physical realm. Now, we've heard these ideas in other writings, not just Gnostic writings. And if you guys remember a show I did a while back about the Holy Spirit, and when it comes to females and their connection to spirituality, it always has to do with seven. The seven sisters, the seven attributes, it's always seven. And it seems to correspond with there's 7 steps to liberation. Okay. There's 7 steps to ascension. There's seven things you got to do. And she is no different. When she's recounting this vision to Jesus, she talks about the 7 gatekeepers. There are 7 realms. So these 7 gatekeepers are things that the soul has to confront and battle and overcome and it's all has to do with human suffering. So the first one, number one, is the darkness. So that's like ignorance, spiritual blindness, being willfully obtuse, like staying in the dark. You're in the dark, right? Number two is desire. So like wanting things outside of yourself, be they material or just a desire, some sort of emotional craving, and those kind of things that can lead to envy and things like that. Right. Adrian, the Pleiades, the seven sisters. The third one is ignorance. So is just lacking understanding or still being willfully obtuse about spirituality, like just throwing it away, right? Staying in ignorance. The fourth one is zeal for death. And that has a lot to do with, it's not that people want to die, it's that a lot of what was happening in the church and what continued to happen in the Christian church is this focus on death. It was always death, 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 right? Like Jesus was teaching all about, love and love your neighbor and forgiveness. And, you can't get to heaven through the eye of a needle and blah, 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 blah. He's teaching all these lovely, wonderful things. And we all say, oh, Jesus is love and yada, yada, yada. But then people put up in church the way he died. They wear around their necks the way he died. All the churches were built on necropolises. Necropolisi? I don't know. Necropoli, maybe. And there were a lot of rituals that had to do with death. And in every Catholic church, you will find something called the Book of the Dead. Like there is this overarching focus on death and dying. And so her thing was, Jesus is teaching us about ascending those things and rising above and living a good life and living moment to moment and doing what makes you joyful and happy and bringing joy to other people. Why is everybody so focused on death? That's, you're so focused on being mortal that you're not living. You're so focused on dying, you're not living. Okay. The fifth is the fleshly wisdom. So that's reliance on worldly knowledge over your own spiritual insight. Well, that's what I was taught in school, so that's the truth, even though that makes no logical sense and seems wrong to me. Then the foolish flesh, which is indulgence in physical desires and pleasures. And we can think about what that, that's overeating, that's using substances, that's sex. It's all kinds of stuff that you have to overcome. And then wrathful wisdom, which is anger, arrogance, being in your ego, right? And especially when it's derived from some kind of false understanding, people who they're just wrong, but they're also loud and wrong. So those were the seven monsters that she had to battle, right? So each of those powers challenges the soul by like giving it riddles or asking questions or imposing tests, right? This is her vision as she's watching this. Mary's soul responds with courage, with wisdom. She's passing the test every time and is disarming them. She wins the confrontation and moves to the next. And it signifies the soul's mastery over these things to get towards this divine knowledge, right? So in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and some other writings, Mary is telling Jesus about this vision that she had and how she was ascending. So Jesus responds about Mary's vision, and he tells her, you are so right about inner knowledge, right? He encourages that inner knowledge. He praises Mary for her deep understanding of it, affirming that salvation and liberation is rooted in spiritual insight, rooted in it, rather than any external ritual or institutional authority. None of that, right? Liberation is about inner wisdom. And then he also praised her about breaking free from material attachment. He really underscored and continued teaching on the importance of liberating the soul from these illusions, right? Like when you say, I can't take it with me, like you gather all this stuff, you have all these things, right? And things deteriorate and you can't take them with you. And what do they actually mean, right? They can't love you back. They aren't going to bring you fulfillment, right? Now, do I still want to be sat in a Ferrari instead of a Nissan? Sure. But they're illusory, right? And at that conversation, Jesus empowered Mary. He affirmed Mary's leadership and spiritual authority. Who did that piss off? Peter and Andrew, right? Peter got pierced, but yes, Ferrari, yes. So in essence, Jesus validates Mary's vision as being a true revelation of the path to salvation, which is liberation, and making her a pivotal figure in teaching his spiritual teachers, right? He says, you are a leader. You have spiritual authority. You get it, right? So it illustrates what Gnostics then grabbed onto later and wanted to keep up with, but also challenged this now traditional Christian view of salvation through faith, through obedience, through following authority, following the rules. How many of us have spent your whole life following the rules and doing what you were supposed to do, and you still don't get a cry in a Ferrari, right? But some a-hole over here gets a Ferrari and he ain't even a good person. He don't follow the rules. He may not even be Christian. So this is where we're at. This really challenges that. And Lavo says, these seem like phases of the religious experience we have, especially when you leave the church. They call it philosophical, though. I agree. It seems like a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times when people leave the Christian church because of the dogma, people will go through a spiritual awakening, and it's hard and it's tough because you have to really look at what was dogma, what was indoctrination, what served other people, and what's the actual truth. And people start really valuing their own spiritual insight. So I totally agree with that. So it was really challenging this hierarchical structure in Christianity that we still have today, where you got to follow all the rules and faith and obedience and never question God and blah, 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 blah. Instead, it emphasized personal spiritual growth, self-knowledge, and overcoming what you are putting too much emphasis on, your earthly attachments, and all of that leads to liberation, right? So we do see in the Bible, Luke chapter 8, verses 1-3. There's a little blurb about Mary Magdalene, verses 1-3, right? It's 3 verses. She is introduced as one of the women who followed Jesus and supported his mystery, right? So Luke describes her as having been exorcised of 7 demons, right? So it says, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases, Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, and the manager of Herod's household, and Susanna, and many others, right? He says that just in those little verses. Now we got to remember translation, right? Because translation, his story, translation matters, right? But this brief mention of Mary Magdalene being freed from the 7 demons in this canonical way, right? There's no details about the demons, right? How the exorcism occurred, blah, 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 blah. It was translated into like literal demon possession, linking it to this erroneous portrayal of Mary as not only is she a reformed prostitute, she's also psycho. She's also possessed by demons. However, other interpretations of Luke's statements about the 7 demons is actually him talking about her vision. Not that she had 7 demons living in her, but she went through this vision of fighting these 7 bad guys, right? These 7 demons, right? The 7 demons were the 7 obstacles, okay? So in the Gospel of Mary, the 7 gatekeepers that Mary encounters during her vision are all like the monsters, right? They're the demons. They're the things that keep you back, right? Desire and wrathful. And they were all these things that then as Luke is talking and as he's portraying this information and then it gets translated, it's she was exorcised of 7 demons, not she fought the 7 gatekeepers. Do you see what I'm saying? So that is an interpretation, right? But it's one that's allowed to be in the Bible that gets passed around to everybody. And then it could, when we say exorcism, we can also think about like the literal word, which is like removing something. I exorcised that, right? So it could just be the attachments that he's talking about. I don't know. I want to give him a little space, right? But those 7 demons that we're talking about is more about her vision and the 7 monsters, right? So when it's portrayed like that in the canonical gospels, it adheres to the orthodoxy, right? The rules and the dogma of the church, presenting Mary as being exorcised by Jesus, right? Jesus exorcised those demons. Instead of Jesus taught her all this stuff, she went and fought these 7 things in her vision, and she was able to do this, right? Because we do want to make sure that we're not presenting women as having any power or leadership or authority or knowledge or anything, right? So let's do a comparison of the standardized gospels and the Gospel of Mary real quick. Okay. So the first one is authority. I've talked about that over and over again. The canonical gospels focus on the male apostles as the most learned, the most knowledgeable, the closest to Jesus, and the primary witnesses to Jesus's resurrection. Okay. The Gospel of Mary, which the church went back and read everything and agreed with, the Gospel of Mary elevates Mary Magdalene as a central figure. And then again, the church said, yes, based on all of the writings that we have and you don't get a look at, that's true. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, there's a lot of focus on inner knowing, which is where the word gnosis comes from, which is what the Gnostics ended up becoming, right? But there's this focus on this inner knowing. Okay, so the Gospel of Mary Magdalene emphasizes self-discovery, spiritual enlightenment over faith and rules and hierarchy, not doing external rituals, not falling for institutional authority, because they fall prey to those 7 gatekeepers as well. Mary Magdalene talks about non-dualism, right? So she challenges the dichotomy, the big, huge difference between the physical and the spiritual, right? She says it's all connected, and salvation or liberation is an internal process. Okay. So even though they're existing at the same time and they affect one another, you can't do anything outside of yourself to get liberation. Other people can't liberate you. Other people can't save you. Other people can't forgive your soul and remove your sins and all these kind of things. You can't pray it away. You can't do these things. It is internal, right? So her text a lot of times really highlights the gendered power struggles that was in early Christianity, and all the gospels that were allowed to be included in the Bible don't talk about that at all. Those are just the ones where the men are in charge and making all the rules. So I just want to give you guys some kind of overarching lessons from the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, some things to think about if you want to incorporate it. If you don't, great. If you want to read it yourself, great. But there are some takeaways, some wisdom that you can take from it. Okay, so the first one is the inner wisdom. I've harped on that, right? True spiritual knowledge comes from within you. As above, so below. As within, so without. You got to go within to get to where you're going, right? You kind of have to turn inside out. Salvation is achieved through self-awareness, and liberation will be a liberation from being attached to all of these things you have no control over. The second one is equity and equality, right? Mary's prominent role challenges that this patriarchy, right? And we've talked patriarchy with this. Not only are men in charge and men are the only ones, but it's these specific men, and everybody else can kick rocks, right? So these specific men can be the only authority and everybody else is just wrong. So there were originally some diverse leadership models. There was some diversity in this, and that got taken over. So, but her thing was equity, right? The third one is the compassion, forgiveness. Those virtues are central to transcending ignorance and kind of getting to spiritual peace. Don't suffer a fool. If you guys have heard that before, like if somebody is ignorant and willfully ignorant or being obtuse and they won't listen as you're trying to tell them something, they won't have a discourse with you or even a debate with you. They want to argue, name call, straw man, use all that kind of stuff. Forgive them their ignorance and move on, right? Don't suffer a fool. And the last one is the critique of that institutional authority. So the Gospel of Mary Magdalene critiques that hierarchical and dogmatic structure over and over and over, and reinstituted multiple times that Jesus was against the hierarchical structure, that he was against all of the rules and the dogmatic things, and you have to do this and you have to do that, and you have to go to church on Sunday, you have to do, you have to say this prayer and you have to do it this way, and you got to do. Jesus was very against that. Well, we can see that in the Gospels that are included in the Bible. Jesus was against that. Mary Magdalene's perception of Jesus was that he hated that, was very, very against it. And so she was very much about advocating for inclusive things, personal spirituality, giving people freedom, helping one another, and really listening to your insight, your own insight, right? Your own instinct. So that is the gospel according to Mary Magdalene. Now, I asked in the beginning, is she a whore or is she Jesus's wife? I still don't know if she was Jesus's wife. There's a lot. There are some things that are found that show that there was an extensive, very deep relationship. There are other writings that aren't part of the Gnostic writings, and aren't obviously biblically based. But there's a lot of stuff that shows this very deep, probably romantic relationship, probably. But based on what I was studying, she is obviously not a repentant prostitute or a whore, never was. She was a prominent disciple, and she was pretty important to Jesus. So that's where we're at. Whether they were married or not, don't know. But I think one of the things, the reason why I called it the Christ wife, or why I talk to it about, or I say things like the Christ wife, is because I think we can look at the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and see that it never bothered Jesus to have discourse and debate with his apostles. Never bothered him. There was never a don't question me, I'm God, right? That's part of the dogma. You don't ever question God. Whereas Jesus is like, yeah, you bring up a good point, So I think we can learn about the Christ wife, or the best friend, or being an apostle of God in the way that you choose to do it, is that to be Christ's wife, or to be Jesus's bro, you can question and you can have your own interpretation and you can use your own insight to figure out what the answers are that you need to follow. And there are a lot more writings out there that are not in the Bible than are in the Bible. And so we can't just say the Bible. Oh, what is it I heard? Somebody said the word of God never changes. And I'm like, which translation? Right? And which ones are you talking about? Because all the Bible is a collection of books that the Catholic Church said it was okay to put in there. And every Bible is what originally the Catholic Church said. So, that's what you're following, is just the ones that the Catholic Church said it's okay to have those in there. So, thank you for joining about that. Before I show you a picture of my dog, I want to talk about upcoming this coming Wednesday. We're going to keep going with the Keys of Enoch. We're going to do part 2, which is the creative mind. And I came up with a way to make it not esoteric in my mind. I've told you guys many times I need a metaphor, like I need to visualize. And man, something hit me, and I think you guys are going to love it, especially if you are into Marvel. I think you're going to love it. M. Lavo says, I always wondered about the history of some of the people mentioned in the Bible, like Mary. She was someone and she had a history. She had parents. Most views of these people are too static, right? Or you just get this vague mentions of certain people. And it's like, well, if they're important enough to mention, what about them? So we have that coming up this Wednesday is in the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch. We're going to talk about the creative mind. And then next Sunday, we're going to talk about, we're going to hit again on goddess energy and what it is and how to get it. Because we've been hitting on that, with the Holy Spirit and the 7 steps of transcendence and all those kind of things. So that's going to be next Sunday. I wonder if I have one after that. Oh, and then the following Sunday, this one's going to be good. We're going to talk about who the Sashu are. And so when we talk about ancient knowledge and things like that, do we really know who the Sashu are? And they play a huge role in who we are today, modern capitalism, modern Christianity, modern Judaism. The Sashu play a huge role in that. And so we're going to talk about that too. So I'm going to show you guys a picture of my dog. But before I do, I love you. I miss you. And you're my favorite. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not so teric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together. Bye.